The wind didn't howl that morning. It whispered, like something waiting to be found, and Clara pressed her numb fingers deeper into the crust of snow, knuckles stinging as shards cut like glass. Her spade struck something solid with a muted clang, not the hollow thud of wood, but a sound heavier, secretive, and the shock of it traveled up her arms until her teeth ached. She froze, breath misting before her face, eyes narrowing against the glare of white that stretched like bone across the valley. For 2 hours she had clawed through drifts, desperate for dry branches before the last embers in her hearth coughed out. And now this stubborn lump crouched under the ice like a buried sin. She knelt, scraping snow until iron glinted dull beneath frost, then leather, warped and cracked. A satchel big enough to cradle a life if you packed it cruelly tight. Her pulse leapt hard. Who buries leather where wolves roam and rivers bite? She tugged the strap. It didn't give. Panic licked her spine, because the sky was sinking toward dusk, and the cold here didn't forgive slowness. She wrenched harder, boots grinding against slick crust, until the satchel tore free with a groan like something waking. It hit the snow heavy, sealed tight under layers of ice, and her breath quickened because the shape wasn't right for grain or tools. It sloped narrow at one end, soft at the other, like limbs bound and bent. Clara's throat locked. She almost let go, almost hurled it back into the hollow and shoveled snow over it, as if that would erase what her fingers had stirred. But hunger and curiosity are cruel sisters, and both had her by the hair. She dragged it to the cedar stand where the wind cut less, braced it against a root, and fumbled with the buckle. Ice had welded the flap shut. She worked her knife under it, prying slow until the seal snapped and the flap sagged open. Inside was darkness stitched with pale threads, linen stiff as bark, folded neat around something small. She peeled one layer back and stilled. A shoe. No, a boot, no bigger than her palm, laces frayed, leather worn to gray by tiny steps that never reached a grown road. Beneath it, another, its twin, and under those, a handful of letters bound by ribbon gone brittle as dead grass. She stared until the world narrowed to that bundle. And in her ears the wind stopped whispering. It sounded like voices now, distant, laughing once and gone, echoing across the ice. She didn't read the names, not yet. She couldn't. Because a sound cracked through the trees, sharp as bone-breaking, and her head snapped up. Hoofbeats, slow, sure, each one pressing weight into the frozen earth like a hammer nailing fate. Clara shoved the satchel closed, heart banging against ribs, and lurched to her feet. Through the drifted timber she saw him, Eli Ward, the rancher from the ridge, his black coat flaring as the wind clawed at him, his horse steaming white against the dusk. He reined in when he saw her, and something in his stillness made the cold crawl deeper, because Eli didn't ride this far down unless he'd lost something worth killing for. His gaze dropped to the satchel at her boots, then rose slow to her face, and the space between them felt like thin ice over deep water. One wrong step, and they'd both go under. Clara swallowed hard. Her voice a rasp torn raw by the wind as she said, "I thought it was Firewood." Eli swung down from the saddle without a word, boots grinding frost to powder, the leather creak and jingle of his spurs sounding too loud in the breathless cold. Clara's fingers twitched toward the satchel, as if she could hide it in the folds of her skirt, absurd against its weight, and the thought made panic bloom sharp behind her ribs. He stopped a yard from her, hat brim low, eyes shadowed but burning like coal under snow. "That's mine," he said, voice flat as the frozen creek, and the truth of it shivered through her before her mind caught up. She forced her chin up, though her knees begged to buckle. "Found it under the drift," she managed, trying to lace the words with calm, but they came out thin, splintered, too brittle to hold weight. He didn't look at her when he reached down, his glove brushing hers as he gripped the satchel, and the brief scrape of contact seared hotter than the fire she no longer had. The flap gaped when he lifted it, and the wind caught the ribbon, yanking it loose so the letters spilled like pale birds across the snow. Eli froze, his breath knotting in the air, and for the first time she saw his jaw clench hard enough to carve a ridge down his cheek. He dropped to his knees, gathering the letters in fists that shook, but not from cold. The smallest boot slid free, landing between them, and Clara's throat closed around a sound she didn't make. His voice broke the silence, rough, not to her but to the ground. "Who told you to dig here?" She swallowed, the truth clawing up like glass. "No one. I was hunting wood." He lifted his head then, slow, and his eyes hit her like a thrown blade. Raw, stripped of the iron calm folks whispered about when they spoke his name in saloons. "You read any?" His tone made her stomach drop because it wasn't a question built for lying. She shook her head fast. "Didn't have the right, didn't want to?" Her voice faltered when he closed the satchel and stood, the weight of it dragging his arm low like a chain. Behind him, the horse stamped, steam twisting from its nostrils like smoke from a gun barrel. Eli's gaze cut past her toward the tree line, scanning shadows, and his jaw set in a shape that spoke of more than grief. It spoke of danger tracking close. He stepped near enough for his coat to brush her sleeve, and when he spoke this time, the words were so soft she almost missed them under the wind. "If anyone else saw what you saw, they'll bury you with it." Clara's pulse thrashed hard, her breath fogging fast as he swung the satchel over his shoulder and whistled low for the horse. She wanted to ask, why the boots, why the letters, where's the woman whose name they held? But the questions tasted like death on her tongue. He mounted smooth, fluid, and for one heartbeat she thought he'd ride off and leave her standing in the ruin of what she'd uncovered. But his hand tightened on the reins, and he looked back, eyes catching the last gray light like steel pulled from a forge. "You're coming with me, Clara Wynne," he said, and it wasn't request or mercy, it was sentence. Then the horse surged forward, and her world narrowed to his shadow, and the satchel swinging like a pendulum heavy with ghosts, as the valley wind rose and carried a sound that didn't belong to wolves. A whistle, distant but closing, the kind men use when they hunt together and don't plan on leaving witnesses. The horse lunged through the snow, scattering white in hard sprays that slapped Clara's skirt. Her fists knotted in Eli's coat as the valley reeled past like a fever dream. Her breath hitched in clouds against his back, the heat of him a harsh brand in a world gone brittle and blind with cold. The satchel swung from the saddle horn, thumping with every stride like a second heartbeat, heavy with secrets she hadn't asked to carry, but couldn't outrun now if she burned her soul trying. Behind them the whistle came again, long, curling, threaded with menace, and Eli's grip on the reins yanked tighter, his voice cutting low over the rush of wind. "Hold on, Clara." She wanted to spit back that she didn't need telling, but her teeth were clattering too hard, and the truth was she didn't know if he meant the horse or her own life hanging by its raw threads. They broke the line of pines and spilled onto a frozen stretch where the moon had smeared itself silver over the crust, and that's when she saw them, shadows cresting the ridge. 4 riders etched black against the sky, their mounts churning drifts into storms, rifles slung low and ready. Eli saw too. She felt the curse grind out of him, more breath than word, and then he wrenched the reins, swinging wide toward a gulch scarred with deadfall and bone-white cottonwoods leaning like ghosts. The horse plunged, snow kicking in sheets, and Clara's stomach pitched as ice cracked under iron shoes. But Eli drove him hard, his shoulders a wall of will between her and the death whistling closer every second. When the gulch swallowed them, shadows folded in, the air thick with the musk of cedar and the copper tang of her own fear. Eli slid from the saddle while it was still moving, hauling her down so fast her knees hit dirt and jarred fire through bone. He shoved the reins into her hands, voice a ragged rasp. "Keep him quiet. Don't move unless I tell you." Then he was gone, melting into the timber with the satchel slung crosswise and the rifle braced in his fist, his black coat slicing the dark like a blade. Clara dragged the horse into the hollow of a fallen trunk, her breath tearing at her throat, and crouched low with one palm on its quivering neck, listening to the drum of hooves hammering nearer, the hiss of leather, the sharp metallic click of men cocking hammers on cold steel. A voice rode the wind, hard and grinning. "Ward, you ain't got anywhere left to bury your sins." Another voice laughed, high and cruel, followed by the crunch of boots hitting snow as someone swung down. Clara's pulse sprinted wild, her fingers digging into bark splinters, the weight of every wrong choice pressing her spine to the earth. She thought of the letters spilling like pale birds, of the boots no bigger than a dream, of the hollow in Eli's face when they fell into his hands, and the question that had burned ever since. What kind of man hides his dead in paper and ribbon? A twig snapped to her left. She turned her head, slow as a dying clock, and there, between two leaning cedars, a glint like a wolf's eye, metal catching moon. Then a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, iron hard, dragging her backward into the dark, and a voice she didn't know growled low against her ear. "Make a sound, and you'll die before your breath freezes." The hand across her mouth smelled of leather and smoke, grinding her teeth into silence while her heels carved trenches through the snow as he dragged her behind a wall of split rock where moonlight fractured into slivers. Clara fought, thrashing, but his grip locked like a shackle until her lungs burned for air, and only when the night swallowed the sound of voices did he spin her against the stone, his shadow looming sharp in the silver gloom. He wasn't dressed like the others. No ranch coat or trail-worn duster, but a black slicker cut neat, boots polished to a gleam that didn't belong in this wilderness, and his eyes, pale as winter glass, raked her face with the cold precision of a ledger man tallying debt. When he spoke, the words slid soft as oil, but carried teeth underneath. "Where's the satchel?" Clara sucked air, choking on fear and frost, her voice scraping thin when it clawed free. I don't." His fingers closed around her jaw, tilting her face toward the moon, and his breath ghosted cold as he hissed, "Lie again, and I'll cut out every letter in those papers one by one, starting with your name." Her knees weakened, truth scorching up her throat because death here would leave nothing but bones for wolves to pick. And still she clung to silence until he yanked something from his coat and let it dangle between them. A badge, dulled with scratches but bright enough to flash law like a knife. Except no county brand marked it, no star she knew, just a circle stamped with a symbol coiled and cruel. Recognition flickered in his eyes when he saw her staring. "Not law you'd trust," he murmured, and slid it away. The wind curled low through the rocks, carrying a murmur of men's voices from the gulch. Closer now, hunting in a net. He leaned in, lips a razor's edge from her ear. "Ward's out there buying himself seconds he can't afford. You'll tell me where he ran, or I'll take you as the letter he won't leave behind." Clara's breath stuttered, but before the terror could splinter her will, a crack split the dark, sharp, and sudden, wood exploding off the cedar trunk inches from the man's head. His curse ripped out like a torn seam as he spun, gun flashing in his fist, but the second shot punched through his sleeve and spun him sideways, blood blooming black across slick cloth. Clara didn't think. Her body moved like something loosed from chains. She lunged, snatched the knife he'd dropped, and slashed wild at the arm that grabbed her skirt, steel biting deep enough to make him howl. Then the world detonated in hoofbeats and snow, Eli's shadow tearing through the trees like a storm, rifle kicking fire, his shout a raw command that cracked the night. "Run!" Clara bolted, skirts whipping, heart hammering like iron on an anvil as branches clawed her face and the dark heaved alive with gunfire and men's voices howling vengeance. Behind her, the wounded man's scream twisted into something uglier than pain. A promise carried on blood and breath. "You can't burn what's written, Ward. It ends when I hold the girl." She stumbled but didn't fall, Eli's hand seizing her arm, hauling her onto the horse with a force that rattled her bones, and then they were flying through the white chaos, the satchel pounding against Eli's hip like a verdict not yet read, his voice ragged at her ear as the wind shredded the last thread of safety. "They know now, Clara. They know what I buried." The horse tore through the timber like a bullet loosed from God's own gun, hooves drumming frost into thunder, Clara clinging so tight her fingers burned against Eli's coat as the satchel slammed her hip with every stride, heavy as a coffin of paper bones. Wind clawed her face raw, the world a blur of white teeth and black trees, until the cabin pitched into view, low, hunched, its roof crouched under snow like a beast hiding from judgment. Eli hauled the reins hard, the horse skidding in a spray of ice that stung her shins, and swung her down before the animal stilled, his breath tearing like fabric as he yanked her toward the door. Inside, the heat was a lie, barely a whisper from a sullen fire guttering in the hearth, and shadows clung to the corners like things with ears. He slammed the bolt home, spun, and in 2 strides ripped the satchel from her shoulder, flinging it onto the table so hard the wood groaned. Papers spilled like pale entrails, ribbon slithering loose, and the sight dragged a sound from him that wasn't word or breath, but something raw torn out of the ribs. His hands trembled as he snatched one letter, crumpling it without reading, then another, then froze when the boots toppled free, thudding soft as muted bells against the scarred plank floor. Clara flinched as he crouched, fingers grazing the leather like a prayer or a curse. And when he rose, his face was carved in iron, eyes scalded with a grief so bright it burned clean through fear. "You think I buried gold out there?" His voice hitched, rough enough to scrape bone. "These," he held the boots up like a pair of sins, "belonged to my girls. My blood, my breath." He hurled them down, snatched a letter, ripped it open so jagged the seal screamed. Ink bloomed black under his thumbs as he shoved it toward her, words scarring the paper. "Take them if you dare. She'll never fight hard enough." His laugh was short, jagged, broken glass in a tin cup. "My wife sold them, Clara. Sold my own blood to men who break more than backs when a debt comes due. Thought she'd buy herself soft living on my ruin." His chest heaved, the rage riding shotgun with grief like twin wolves. Clara's voice tore out before she could choke it. "Where are they now?" His eyes slammed to hers, pupils blown wide as bullet holes. "That's what these papers buy," he rasped. A map to every gate of hell they were driven through. He fisted the letters, veins like rope under skin, then threw them into the fire. Flames lunged, greedy, licking secrets into smoke, but not fast enough, because a sound knifed through the log crackle, distant yet slicing clean. Hoofbeats. Many. A low whistle curling behind like a hook. Eli stiffened, spinning toward the window where night sagged heavy as a gallows cloth. "They tracked us," he said, voice flat as a gun barrel laid cold on your neck. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs, breath jagging sharp as shattered ice. "What do they want?" Her words broke when he cut her with a look seared down to steel. "What do you think?" He dragged the rifle off its hooks, jammed cartridges home with the precision of a man who's tasted too much blood to waste time on prayer. Then his voice dropped to a scrape of iron and ash. "If they get through that door, don't run, don't scream. Take this blade and aim for the throat. Because men who traffic in children don't leave witnesses breathing." The hoofbeats swelled, rolling like thunder fed by hate, and outside the snow began to burn with torches. The first torch arced through the dark like a comet and buried itself in the drift with a hiss, throwing a wash of orange that made the cabin walls sweat shadows. Then another, closer, painting the window in molten streaks as hoofbeats rolled to a halt and boots thudded down like hammers sealing a coffin. Clara pressed her back to the logs, the knife slick in her palm, breath quivering out of her like steam from a cracked kettle, while Eli stood rooted in the center, rifle cradled low, body loose and ready as rawhide drawn tight. Voices spilled from the dark, lazy with the kind of hunger that knows it will feed. "Ward, you got two choices. Open that door, hand over the woman, and maybe we let you keep enough blood to warm your boots." Eli didn't blink. His voice slid under the racket like a cold blade. "You boys are talking to the wrong man. If you wanted mercy, you should have sent a preacher." Laughter cracked, high and cruel, followed by the rasp of steel clearing leather, the sound like snakes sliding over bone. Clara's gut knotted hard enough to make her sway, but Eli didn't move, didn't even breathe deep, just lifted his eyes to hers and said the kind of thing you don't say unless you mean to die on it. "Stay behind me, no matter what breaks." The window blew inward on a gunshot, shards singing across the floor, and Eli dropped to a knee, the rifle barking flame that lit the room like Judgment Day. A scream split the dark, choked short, and boots pounded hard as men scattered behind their fire like wolves circling a snare. Clara clutched the wall, heart slamming like a thrown door as Eli slammed another round home, teeth bared in a snarl that wasn't rage so much as a vow. The night howled back, torches spinning, bullets chewing the logs in vicious snarls of lead, one grazing so close it seared her hair with a kiss of heat. She bit down on a cry, crouching lower, and through the roar of gunfire and the stink of burning pitch she heard them. Those letters whispering from the fire even as they curled into ash, telling secrets the dead wouldn't take quiet. Eli roared her name, flinging his body across the room as a shotgun blast ripped through the door and punched a hole big enough to see hell grinning through. Wood dust rained like bitter snow. The smoke clawed her throat raw. Then Eli was dragging her to the back wall, shoving her toward the cellar hatch half buried under a rug stiff with age. "Go," he rasped, and when she shook her head, wild-eyed, he crushed her hand around the knife hilt until her bones ached. "They're not after me, Clara. They want you breathing long enough to talk. After that, you're nothing but weight." His words slammed like fists, but his eyes, God help her, they burned like a man bracing against the last tide. She opened her mouth to fight him, but the hinge of the front door shrieked under a boot, splinters spitting as iron screamed on iron, and through the gap she saw faces, shadow-ragged, teeth flashing in torchlight, eyes bright with the fever that chews men hollow. Eli rose slow, rifle steady, the set of his shoulders a sermon in steel, and his voice came low and final, like the earth speaking before it splits. "Then let's see who walks out of winter." The door gave way on the next kick, and fire poured in. The door tore off its hinges in a roar of splinters and smoke, and men came through like wolves on fire, faces flaring in torchlight, mouths slick with hate, boots pounding snow into the floorboards as Eli's rifle bellowed thunder and spat heat that tore the first one back in a red bloom that painted the lintel. Clara dropped low as lead shrieked through the room, the stink of powder and pitch clawing her throat, her ears ringing until sound bent sideways, every heartbeat a hammer striking iron. Eli swung like a storm, the butt of his rifle caving a jaw as another man lunged in with a blade that flashed close enough to slice the air from Clara's cheek. She stumbled, knife clenched so hard her knuckles burned, vision snagging on fire-lit chaos, boots skidding in blood, shadows leaping the walls, a torch spinning wild and kissing the rafters with tongues of orange that hissed and grew. Eli's snarl ripped through the smoke as he ripped the Colt from a dead man's holster and fired point blank, muzzle flash strobing his face into something savage and holy all at once. 2 bodies fell like broken gates, but the third came fast and mean from the flank, shotgun leveled, and Clara didn't think. She drove the knife up under his ribs, felt heat gush over her hand as his breath punched out in a grunt that smelled of rot and whiskey. He collapsed in a boneless heap, dragging her half down with him until Eli's arm hooked her waist and yanked her clear, his shout a raw rasp against her ear. "Move, Clara." They crashed through the back door into a world white as bone and loud as war, snow blazing orange from the fire licking the roof behind them, the wind slashing sparks into their faces as torches carved madness through the night. Hoofbeats churned beyond the tree line, reinforcements or hell itself, and Eli's breath ripped like torn canvas as he flung her toward the half-buried root cellar, gaping black under the lean of an oak. Inside. Now! She shook her head, blood freezing on her wrist, voice shredding on the word. "No!" His hands clamped her shoulders hard enough to grind bone, his eyes blistered raw in the fire glow as he rasped. "You die out here. They win twice. Go!" He shoved her into the dark and swung the hatch down just as a bullet screamed past and punched a welt into the wood where her head had been. She crouched in pitch black, breath scalding, the knife still slick in her grip as boots thundered above and Eli's roar cracked the sky. Then the world shattered under the concussion of his gun, the echo a bone-deep boom that rolled out across the frozen gulch like judgment. Clara bit her fist to keep from screaming, every sound above her sharp as glass. The grunt of men, the crash of bodies, the spit of fire-eating walls and names and sins until it all blurred into one long howl of wind and blood and the drum of a heart that refused to quit, even as the floor trembled with ruin. And then, a silence so sudden it rang, a hush thick as snow settling over graves, broken only by the slow crunch of boots moving toward the hatch, and a voice she didn't know sliding down the cracks like oil on cold steel. "Eli Ward's finished. Bring the girl." The hatch ripped open in a glare of torchlight, snowflakes spinning like sparks as rough hands clamped Clara's arms and yanked her into the night, her boots skidding across ice-glazed red where the fire's glow spilled from the cabin's burning bones. Smoke clawed her throat raw, sparks stung her lashes, and the stink of charred pine tangled with the copper stench of blood until she could taste ruin like ash on her tongue. Shapes loomed everywhere, men thick with shadow, faces streaked in soot and sweat, eyes fever-bright with the kind of hunger that doesn't end with killing. A fist cracked across her jaw when she fought, white stars bursting in her skull, the knife spinning from her grip to vanish in the drift. She hit the snow on her knees, vision lurching, and through the roar in her head she heard a sound that stopped her heart cold. Boots dragging, slow, heavy, trailing a ribbon of scarlet that darkened the frost behind. They hauled Eli into the circle of firelight like a carcass, his coat torn open and blooming red where lead had kissed deep, his hair black with sweat, his face a chalk mask smeared with soot. But his eyes, God help her, those eyes still burned, twin brands in the ruin, locking on her with a heat that seared through the choke of fear until her ribs ached from the force of it. The man with the serpent badge knelt in the snow, that slick black coat barely kissed by frost, his pale grin coiling under torch fire as he tilted Eli's chin up with 2 fingers and murmured soft as silk on bone. "You hid them well, Ward. Buried their names under 100 miles of ice and prayer. Thought you could burn the trail clean." He flicked his gaze to Clara, smile sharpening. "But paper sings when it burns." And she heard the tune, didn't she? Eli spat blood dark as midnight, his voice ground down to iron filings. "You'll choke on every letter before I let you touch her." The man laughed low, a sound that crawled and rose smooth, brushing ash from his cuff. "Touch her? Oh no, Cowboy. We're past that. We need her talking." He nodded once, and 2 shadows wrenched Eli to his knees, forcing his face into the snow until crimson spread like ink in white linen. Clara tore against her captors, her scream ripping raw into the wind, but a hand clamped her throat, fingers cold as coin, and the serpent man leaned close enough for his breath to ghost her cheek, whispering like a lover speaking damnation. "Every secret has a price, sweetheart." His gun slid from its holster with a purr, the barrel gleaming black as judgment as he pressed it to Eli's temple, his smile curving like a sickle as he murmured, "Let's see how fast you start paying." Snow burned her knees as Clara slammed down under the weight of hands like iron, her throat raw with the scream that wouldn't break past the grip crushing it, her breath hot in clouds that froze before her lips, while the torchlight bled wild across the white world turning red. The serpent man's pistol gleamed black against Eli's temple, his voice a slow pour of poison as he whispered, "You know how this ends, Ward. Tell me where the last trail leads, and maybe I'll let her breathe long enough to bury you." Eli spat blood into the snow, teeth flashing like broken marble, and when he spoke, his words crawled up from the marrow, rough and ragged but sharp as nails. "You want the trail? Burn that sky, bastard. It's written in stars you'll never ride." The serpent man laughed low, curling, a sound that crawled under Clara's skin and pressed the barrel harder until skin dimpled pale against steel. One nod, and the men yanking Clara dragged her forward, shoving her onto her knees beside Eli so close she felt the shudder in his breath, saw the split in his lip where blood bloomed black under fireglow. His eyes, God, those eyes, found hers and locked, not with fear but something fierce and final, a vow hammered in silence between heartbeats. Then it all detonated. A crack split the night as Eli wrenched sideways, faster than sense should allow, his shoulder slamming the serpent man's wrist wide so the gunshot screamed wild into the dark and chewed sparks from the oak. Eli drove up from his knees like a blade loosed from hell, teeth bared, blood slick on his coat, ripping the pistol from the man's grip with a snarl that tore the silence raw. Another shot roared, torchlight flared white in Clara's eyes, and the world shattered into screams and smoke as bodies lunged in a blur of black coats and bronze steel. Clara felt fingers claw for her hair, jerking her backward, but the snow saved her, slick as sin, sending her sprawling as the blade she'd dropped glinted near the drift. She snatched it cold, spun on her knees, and drove steel home into the thigh of the man dragging her, the scream ripping his throat open as he toppled and pitched her free. Gunfire thundered through the smoke-stung night, Eli firing blind but true, carving holes through shadows until the serpent man lunged from the dark like a wolf with eyes of ice, blade flashing for Eli's ribs. The clash cracked like bone splitting, Eli's grunt torn raw as steel met flesh, and blood leaped black against the snow. Clara moved without thought, the knife slick in her fist, her heart an anvil sparking rage as she lunged behind the serpent man and slashed deep across the cord of his neck. Heat gushed hot enough to burn the frost from her cheeks, his body jerking, voice gurgling into nothing as Eli wrenched the pistol and emptied the last round into the face of a shadow rising behind. Silence hit like a hammer dropped from heaven. No voices, no boots, just the hiss of torches dying in the snow and the slow drip of blood pattering like rain on stone. Clara's breath rattled in her chest as she crawled to Eli, her hands skidding over ice until they closed on his coat, where blood spread wide as a river under his ribs. His eyes burned in the half-light, fierce and soft all at once, as his voice grated low, breaking on her name like a prayer torn in half. Clara. Get the letters. Burn the rest. Then darkness folded him down, heavy as winter, and she was left on her knees in a graveyard of snow and fire, clutching a man who'd killed for ghosts and maybe died for her. The wind came howling through the burned bones of the cabin as dawn dragged its gray belly over the ridge, cold gnawing like teeth, while Clara pressed both hands against Eli's wound, feeling the heat drain from him into her palms like a fire choking on its last breath. Blood soaked through her skirts, dark and stubborn, but his chest still hitched shallow, ragged, a bellows fighting the iron weight of night, and she bent low until her lips brushed the grit of his jaw, whispering wild promises to a god who'd gone deaf long ago. Around them the snow lay trampled and torn, bodies strewn like broken pews after a storm, torches guttering to black snakes in the drifts, and the serpent man sprawled face down where his blood had painted a halo no saint would wear. Clara crawled to his coat, fingers clawing through stiff leather until they closed on the map case bound in cord, the same serpent stamped on its hide, slick with death. She yanked it free and staggered to the fire pit where the last coals pulsed like an old heart, tore the letters from the satchel, and fed them one by one to the flames until words curled black and names screamed silent as ink blistered into smoke that rose like ghosts flung free. Eli stirred, voice shredded thin as paper cutting her soul. Don't burn them all. She froze, ash streaking her wrists, and turned to him where his eyes gleamed fever-bright through a veil of frost. He dragged breath like chain links, teeth bared in a grin that hurt to look at. One letter, bottom seam. Read it before you decide what hell you'll carry. Her hands shook as she ripped the seam, a slip of parchment sliding out soft as sin, stained with blood and tears not hers. The words crawled across in a scrawl raw with haste. If you're reading this, they've sold more than your girls. They've taken the railroad contract. Names inside buy votes, land, every law you thought you could trust. Burn us, Ward. But burn them too. Clara's breath hitched sharp enough to cut as she stared at the coals devouring the last scraps of lives. And behind her Eli laughed low, bitter as iron dust. You see it now, Clara? Wasn't just me they wanted dead. Whole damn West rides on blood inked in those pages. She crushed the parchment in her fist until it wept between her fingers like something alive, then crawled back, pulling his head into her lap, her tears carving warm rivers down his grit-streaked face. You're not dying here, she swore, and he rasped a sound that might have been a laugh or a prayer strangled in its cradle. Behind them, the wind shifted, carrying the faint clang of iron far off, the railroad breathing like a beast turning in its sleep. And Clara knew the fight hadn't ended, only folded deeper into the earth where fire and men made pacts in ink. She bent low until her forehead pressed his, voice steady, though her bones rattled like dice in a dead man's cup. You stay breathing, Eli Ward, and I'll carry the weight you buried, even if it drags me through hell. His lips twitched against hers, a ghost of a smile, and then his eyes slid shut as the first pale knife of sunlight split the clouds and laid itself across the blood-black snow, bright and merciless, like truth.